Okay, now that you have done your best to chop out this mortise as accurately as you can, we need to check it for square. And so how do we get in there? How do we do that? So this is an example of a ridiculously adorable and mostly worthless square, but it does serve a benefit in that I can get in here and I can start to check across this knife line on this face and checking from the other face. I can run all the way across and I can start to check these things out basically where I'm ready to go. It becomes a bit of a challenge though in using this to measure the ends of the board just because the head of the square is not quite long enough. So I can check the bottom, I could check on this face, but the head of the square is in the way for me to really see where that blade is. So this one is good, and they have different blades on this one that you can switch out and check. But similar concept, a short square here, short head on this one. It's a fixed blade, but the blade is fairly wide to get in here and double check things. Looking at some of my layout tools, I have a little 6-inch square, and actually I think this would probably be the one that I would use. So I can check, because the head of this square is so long, I can check out the section here on top, the end grain of that mortise, and because the head is in the way in that manner, I could flip this thing around and double check. And I just want to look straight across to make sure that the blade of the square is in contact with where my knife line is. And if I've done that, and I can see it on this face as well as the other face, then that's the only way I can really do a good double check. So the question is, how do I check the edges of the mortise? And I would suggest that this square is still a good tool for doing that, because I can get it in here and I can rotate this until the top edge and the bottom edge of the square are engaged, and I can start to sight down the edge of the square and see exactly where it's making contact. And I can get into these corners. So now I'm looking at this corner here, and I'm going to drag it all the way down until the top corner of that square engages. But in doing this, I can get in and really do a double check of everything, and that looks decent. Just to go down this path a little bit more, this giant square, my 12-inch square, will definitely work. It's a little limited just because the blade is larger on this square than the one that we just had, the 6-inch. So, but in a pinch, this one will work fine. So you don't need a ton of squares, but you do need to get something in there to check for how accurate we are. And I saw something in here that I wanted to make a mark to remind myself of. It looks like I'm okay, except for there's a high spot on this interior edge. And so I want to draw a little line in there as a reminder of where the problem is. What I don't want to do is, especially if I have a couple of areas that are problematic, I don't want to start to remember or try to remember exactly where those things are, because the second you flip this board around, sometimes you lose that context. So by marking it down, I no longer am guessing. I know exactly where it is, and then I can come in and true this thing up. And when you've been doing this for a while, you can also get very adept at just looking into the mortise to see trouble areas. If I'm looking through this here, I can start to see a belly, I can start to see corners, which starts to get forgotten about. These corners where we have to join both of those chisel cuts. For starters, for new people to cutting mortises by hand, those are areas that often get forgotten about. And any amount of material that's in here that will not allow that tenon to slip through, that's going to be a problem for us. So we need to clear those things out, and we need to ensure that there's enough glue surface left in these positions to allow us to do what we need to do. Last piece about mortises, so we've worked really hard to create our layout lines and made those on both faces, so we have a starting point on both of those surfaces and we can connect those dots. If I were to make a mistake somewhere along the road and I were to cut past my layout line here, it really is not the end of the world. we just need to square up all of those locations on this face and the other face to the new line. And as long as that's nice and parallel to the other, and it's square all the way through, then we'll be just fine, because we'll make all the adjustments we need to on the tenon. And traditionally, when you cut Mortise tenons, you always start with the mortise, and you cut the tenon accordingly to whatever you have here on this side. So I'm not going to lose sleep if this one is not exactly as I laid it out, and if it's modified a little bit, it's fine. I could work with that. But once I'm done with that, then I'm ready to start cutting the tenons, and we'll do that in the next video. Thank you very much, everyone.